It was the year 1995 when Jessica and her family moved into a house in the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. The house was old, built in the 1950s, and had been passed down through the generations. Located on a quiet country road, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, the house seemed like the perfect place to raise a large family. But little did they know that this peaceful home would soon become the source of their greatest fears. Jessica was the eldest of 8 children, with her twin sister Emily being the closest in age. They had a younger brother named Jason and 5 other siblings who filled the house with laughter and chaos. Their parents, Mark and Sarah, had decided to move out of the city, searching for a quieter life in the countryside. The house they chose was perfect. A large 2-story home with a big yard, a wraparound porch, and an attic that was full of old, forgotten memories. When they moved in, everything seemed normal. They unpacked their belongings, set up rooms, and spent their days exploring the surrounding land. The first few months were peaceful. The family settled into a routine, and Jessica, being the oldest, took on the responsibility of looking after her younger siblings. However, as time passed, strange things began to happen. The attic was the first thing that caught Jessica's attention. It was an old, musty space that seemed to hold the remnants of generations past, old furniture covered in dust, cracked mirrors, and the faint scent of something ancient. The door to the attic was always locked, and Jessica's parents never allowed the children to go inside. They were told that the attic was simply off limits, but that only fueled the curiosity of Jessica and her siblings. One rainy afternoon, Jessica, Emily, and Jason decided to explore the house, as they often did when their parents were out. They climbed the creaky staircase to the attic, where they found the door locked as usual. The smell of mildew and old wood seeped out from under the door. Emily, eager to know what lay beyond, tried the door handle again, but it wouldn't budge. "I think it's best if we leave it alone," Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly, but Emily insisted they try again. As they struggled with the door, they suddenly heard something. It was faint at first, like a soft scratching sound, almost as if something was moving across the wooden floor above them. The noise was coming from the attic. The sound was unnerving, and the air seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. The 3 siblings exchanged uneasy glances. "Who's up there?" Jason whispered, his voice full of dread. Before Jessica could respond, the scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a loud thud, followed by an eerie silence. The feeling of something watching them sent a chill down their spines. "Let's go," Jessica said firmly, pulling her siblings away from the door. The idea of venturing into the attic had lost its appeal. But little did they know, this was just the beginning. The first real encounter with whatever was haunting their new home came on a stormy night. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain lashed against the windows, making the house feel even colder than it was. Jessica, Emily, and Jason were huddled in the living room, playing a game to distract themselves from the storm. But suddenly, they heard a sound that froze them in their tracks. It was a slow, dragging sound, like someone walking across the wooden floor above them. The noise was deliberate, methodical, as if someone was pacing back and forth across the attic. Jessica's heart raced. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Emily nodded, her face pale. "What is it?" "I don't know," Jessica said, her voice low. She stood up, her legs shaky, and moved cautiously toward the staircase. The sound continued, growing louder with each step. She motioned for Emily and Jason to stay behind. "I'm going to check." Jessica slowly climbed the staircase, her hand gripping the railing for support. She stopped at the top of the stairs, listening carefully. The sound of footsteps continued, echoing through the old wooden floor of the attic. Her pulse quickened. She knew she had to investigate. Taking a deep breath, she approached the attic door, feeling a sense of unease wash over her. The door creaked as she turned the handle. It was locked again, just as she had expected. Jessica's mind raced. She wondered if it was just the house settling, or if there was something more sinister at play. But the more she listened, the more the footsteps seemed to have a rhythm. They moved from one side of the attic to the other, then returned again. It felt as though whatever was up there was watching her, waiting for her to open the door. Without thinking, she grabbed a small stool from the hallway, stood on it, and peered through the tiny crack in the door. What she saw left her speechless. Standing in the far corner of the attic, she saw the outline of a figure, a woman, tall and gaunt, with long, wild hair that flowed in every direction. The woman was standing perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the door. Jessica froze, unable to move, unable to speak. The figure seemed to sense her presence, and within seconds, it vanished into thin air. Terrified, Jessica stumbled back from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what she had seen, but she was certain that whatever it wasn't human. She ran back downstairs, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "There's someone up there," Jessica whispered, her voice shaking. "A woman. I saw her." The three siblings sat together in the living room, too scared to speak. The sounds continued that night, growing louder and more erratic. The footsteps sounded like they were moving closer to them, but no one dared to go upstairs again. The house felt different now, darker, colder, and more oppressive. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences intensified. At night, Jessica would wake up to the sound of whispering, as if someone was speaking to her from the other side of the wall. Her siblings reported seeing shadowy figures in the hallways, fleeting glimpses of something moving just out of sight. But it wasn't just the children who were affected. Their parents, Mark and Sarah, began to experience things as well. One night, Mark awoke to find his bedroom door wide open, though he was sure he had closed it before going to bed. The door creaked loudly as it swayed back and forth, as if someone had been standing there, waiting for him to notice. Sarah, exhausted from weeks of restless nights, would often hear soft tapping on the window, only to find no one there when she looked outside. The house seemed to be playing tricks on them, and no matter how many times they reassured themselves that it was just the house settling, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Jessica became obsessed with the attic. She couldn't stop thinking about the woman she had seen. Every time she walked past the door, she felt a chill down her spine. Something was calling to her, something she couldn't understand. One fateful night, the family was gathered in the living room when they heard a loud crash from upstairs. It sounded like furniture being overturned, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps running down the hallway. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "It's happening again," she whispered. She motioned for her siblings to stay put and ran up the stairs. As she reached the top, the sounds intensified. She could hear heavy breathing and faint whispers coming from the attic door. Without thinking, she grabbed the key to the attic and unlocked the door. The moment she opened it, a cold wind rushed past her, blowing out the candle she had been holding. The room was pitch black, and she could hear something moving in the darkness. "Who's there?" Jessica called out, her voice trembling. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, and wearing a tattered white dress. The woman's eyes were wide and hollow, and her long hair fell around her face in tangled knots. She stared at Jessica, her gaze piercing through the darkness. Jessica took a step back, terrified. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure opened its mouth, but no words came out. Instead, a deep, guttural growl filled the room. The temperature dropped drastically, and Jessica felt a force pushing her backward. Suddenly, Emily and Jason rushed up the stairs, calling her name. When they saw the figure in the doorway, they screamed in unison. But before Jessica could react, the woman lunged toward them, vanishing into the shadows once more. The family fled the house that night, never to return. Jessica and her siblings moved to a new home, but the memories of that haunted house never left them. They still hear the footsteps in the attic, and sometimes Jessica swears she sees the woman in her dreams, still watching, still waiting. To this day, no one knows the true history of the house in Texas. Some say it was built on cursed land. Others believe it was the home of a vengeful spirit who had never left. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. The house was haunted, and the family who lived there would never forget the horrors they faced.